Hi, Laura. Hello. I'm so sorry, everyone, that I'm late. Well, it's a long story. I have to pick my father up at the airport. He's in a wheelchair. There was traffic. So here I am in my car taking this call. So my apologies in advance.
We're glad to hear you, see you, and completely understand. So, um, thank you everybody for being here. I'm Laura Wondolowski, and I'm the interim executive director at the Peace Development Fund. For those of you who know us, thank you for being part of these Reframing Philanthropy conversations. For anyone who's new to PDF, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We wanted to have these conversations because traditional philanthropy doesn't work for everybody. PDF was founded by activists to fund social justice movements and organizing, and we believe in trust-based philanthropy and philanthropy that serves everybody and is led by the people most impacted by the things that they're organizing around. And we wanted to continue to have that conversation with our donors and others in an open way so that we can collectively keep pushing our industry, if you will, to do better. So today's topic is around climate investor activism. There's a lot happening and a lot more that needs to happen, honestly. And I think this is one of the many levers we can push to move things in the right direction. So I'm going to have Sophia start us with a little bit of a poll just to see familiarity in this topic. So, Sophia.
Did that show up for everybody? Awesome.
All right. I am not seeing the poll, so I'm going to leave it up to Sophia to let us know when that is done. And if you can read off what the sentiment in the room is, that would be great.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm thinking, Laura, that us as co-hosts probably can't see it, but yeah, so the first question, how involved are you in climate activism? We had like a three-way split. So we had one person say very involved, one person say involved, and one person say do what I can. The second question, have you ever participated in a shareholder resolution before? We had one person say yes, two people say no. And then the last question, how familiar are you with the shareholder engagement process? We don't have anyone who's very familiar. It looks like the majority of the people are somewhat familiar. Um, and then we have a couple people who aren't too sure about that. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here.
Great. Thank you so much. So great. I sounds like we're all in a similar boat, know a little bit, and want to know more, which is why we've got our speaker today. So the format for today, we're going to have our speaker speak for the first about 20 minutes or so till about 12:35. Then we're going to have time to have a conversation. So I was going to do breakout rooms, but because we've got a small group today, I think we can stay in the main room. If people feel like you need the comfort of a small breakout room to have a conversation, we can do that as well. But we are really excited to be joined by Josh Zinner. He is the CEO of the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. He's been doing that since January of 2016, and he has more than 25 years of experience as a nonprofit leader, coalition builder, and policy advocate. He's a longtime public interest lawyer who's worked to promote social and economic justice and corporate accountability. We're really excited to have him here today, and his knowledge and experience fighting for people against, the big monoliths, I think is really important. So thank you, Josh, and I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us about your organization and how we can use some of these tools.
Great. Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here. Apologies again that I'm in my car on my phone, but at least on Zoom. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks to all of you. So yeah, I'm going to talk, I want to talk a little bit about ICCR, about the work we do, about some of the challenges we're facing, and then really want to kind of open it up so that we can have a conversation, just open it up to questions, comments, thoughts, and, happy to talk, take the conversation in any direction. So ICCR, I'm the CEO of ICCR. We are now 53 years old. ICCR started in, it stands for Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. We started in 1971 when a group of religious investors began engaging with companies about business they were doing in apartheid South Africa, and really worked with others to exert economic pressure on the South African government through corporate engagement, and really through that process pioneered a lot of these strategies of shareholder engagement on environmental and social issues long before ESG became a buzzword. So today we are a coalition of over 300 institutional investors in the US and globally. We still have faith-based investors, very much at the core, but also an even greater number of aligned values-based investors like labor pension funds and other pension funds and endowments, and asset managers that are focused on responsible investment, and others. And so what we do as a coalition, and our members are in the US, but also global. As a coalition, we help our members to engage with public companies using their public equities that they're holding, to push for change. And we have our members set program areas, priorities every year. So our priority areas, and I'll talk a little bit about the work under each of these, and then happy to to talk further later. But climate and environmental justice is a big priority area, as is worker justice, equitable global supply chains, health equity. We do a lot of work on corporate political influence, so lobbying and political spending. And then we have a broad initiative on human rights, where we're pushing companies and investors on their responsibilities to respect human rights in operations and supply chains pursuant to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And so what does it mean, the work that we do? It's our members are engaging with hundreds of public companies every year, the biggest multinationals globally, on down, and by engagement, really dialogue is where we start. So we're reaching out as investors to really push companies on our concerns that environmental, different environmental and social risks, let's say forced labor in their supply chains. Obviously our members are coming from, fundamentally from the place of caring about these issues, caring about corporate impacts on people and planet. But our tool is to make the case to companies about why this is also a business risk, why having forced labor in your supply chains creates reputational risk and creates financial and regulatory risk. And so we take that case to companies, and we take to companies our concerns that these practices create broader systemic risks, which impact the economy more broadly, especially in our conversations on climate. And I can go back to that a little bit. And so we're at the table with companies. we make specific asks, and when companies are not moving forward on those asks, our members will file shareholder resolutions, which enable us to put the issue on the corporate proxy at their annual general meeting, and is a way to really highlight the issue with other shareholders, with management, with the board, and really create press opportunities. And really, it's a way to put pressure on the companies with the ultimate goal of bringing that company back to the table for dialogue. Our members are really some of the most active filers globally. They filed about 450 resolutions so far in this proxy season, and so ICCR is really an active community of investors who really care fundamentally about these issues. We also work very closely, and I think this is one thing that's very unique about the ICCR investor community, is we work very closely. We don't see our investor engagement as about ESG per se, just about company value and analyzing company value, but really we want to understand much more broadly the impacts of corporate practices on people and communities, and bring that to the table with companies. So we work very closely with stakeholder partners, community-based organizations, labor groups, and NGOs that have expertise in the field. And so we're in broad coalition, not just with investors, but we serve kind of a bridging function to bring investors together with impacted communities or with NGO experts, to ensure that we're really understanding not only what the impacts are for people, but also how our partners want to see companies address these impacts. So that's a really important piece of the work that we do. And I would say just to give you an example of some of the areas that we work on, within our climate and environmental justice, we have and the way it's set up is we have member leadership teams that set strategy and then work to set up other investors, engaging with companies and sectors and industries. So in climate area, we're looking more obviously broadly at greenhouse gas emissions and compliance with the Paris Agreement, but we're specifically engaging with banks on that, and also utilities. Our focus is really with a just transition framework. So we're pushing them not just on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also on ensuring that that workers, that communities, that those voices are heard, and that the transition comes with a deep understanding of the impacts that transition will have, and that's part of what needs to be addressed in our engagements with companies. We have a program on climate lobbying, and that's across all sectors, because we're concerned that corporate lobbying and political engagement is really inhibiting, no surprise to anyone on this call, really inhibits sound public policy around climate, and really across all areas. And we're really pushing companies not just on their negative lobbying, but also on being affirmative and lobbying for positive climate policy. We work on methane because we see that as a climate accelerator, and we're really pushing. That's an area where we've had quite a bit of success, because it's in the strong interest of companies to reduce methane leakage, and there's now sort of a growing consensus on that. But more broadly, we're working around greenhouse gas emissions across sectors. In the worker rights area, we are focused on sectors where there are a concentration of low wage workers, and really working on living wage and paid leave and worker health and safety, and freedom of association. So we're really pushing that with companies, have been very involved there. And also we're building out a project on the impact of technology, including artificial intelligence, on low wage workers. And we'll be rolling out work on that, and we're sort of scoping that work right now. And then we work on supply chains, particularly looking at human rights issues around forced labor, around environmental justice in the global supply chains of the big brands, and health equity, where we're engaging with the pharma sector on drug pricing and access, insurance sector, which is a tough one, access to nutrition, a number of issues there. And across the piece, we're looking broadly at the influence of corporate lobbying and political spending on the negative influence on public policy, not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well, and really pushing companies to align their lobbying and political spending, their corporate political engagement with their stated core values, and put in place governance processes that enable them to do that. And then we have this initiative called the Investor Alliance on Human Rights, which I referenced earlier, where we're really trying to push companies to fulfill their responsibilities under the UN guiding principles, and really to drive human rights due diligence processes into their core corporate governance, so that they're putting in place mechanisms proactively to address their most salient human rights risks, rather than reacting to problems when they happen from a PR perspective. And so that's a lot, but just gives you a sense of kind of the range of issues that we work on. I would say, look, we've been at this a long time, and there's a lot of challenges right now. I mean, there's always been challenges in getting companies to move. They move slowly, and engagement often is a patient process. But we have, when we can get companies to move, there can be a lot of impact. And I think we've been pretty successful through the years, despite all the challenges. And one of the byproducts of that success is now that there's a lot of political pushback on the work that we're doing. And I'm sure you all have, noted this. It's sort of, this anti-ESG push at all levels. So they've managed to, the political right has managed to turn ESG, which frankly has been pretty ill-defined. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, and it's been a very loose term. We live in that world, but that's not what our work is about. But a lot of the big funds have used ESG to kind of greenwash, or to promote climate-friendly funds when actually the investment they're doing may be having an opposite effect. So there's been a lot of problems with ESG, but nevertheless, the right has turned it into this, boogeyman, and kind of what they did with critical race theory, and so we've been dealing with a lot of the fallout from that. So red states are passing laws barring their state funds from investing with asset managers that are engaging on climate risk, which is pretty insane when you think that pension funds have a fiduciary duty of impartiality to ensure that their pensioners who are earning their pensions in 20 years have the same ability to receive their pension than those that are receiving their pension next year. So none of this makes any sense from a fiduciary perspective, but it's been really politicized. Some red state AGs and now members of Congress are coming after investors with subpoenas and empty threats of antitrust enforcement, really coming after collaborations of investors and banks that are working on climate risk with threats of antitrust enforcement. These have no legal basis, but they're creating a big chilling effect. Now there's laws in Congress that have been proposed that would eviscerate the shareholder proposal process. The National Association of Manufacturers and the U.S. Chamber sued last year the SEC to basically get rid of the shareholder proposal process on corporate First Amendment grounds, citing the Citizens United, I would say the disastrous Citizens United precedent, and so these challenges go on and on. This spring, or I should say in February, Exxon sued one of our members, two shareholders, including one of our members, to block a shareholder proposal, pushing them or asking them to accelerate their transition plan. And we, ICCR we've gotten kind of tangled up in that because it's one of our members, And so we wrote a letter to the Exxon board, and then they've attacked us in their proxy statement. And some of our members are right now in a vote no campaign against 2 Exxon board members, including their chair, about because we see this lawsuit against investors as really a slap suit intended to silence dissent by investors about their transition planning. So I could go on and that, but it just gives you a sense of some of the challenges that we're all facing. I think we see an urgent need, not just to play defense here, but to be pushing this work forward more than ever. The good news is that most investors, understand environmental and social risk and the impact that it has on long-term value of investments, and more and more companies also understand the importance of having robust DEI policies and transition plans. The problem is that all of the political pressure from the right is creating a chilling effect, and we're seeing it in the big asset managers like BlackRock retrenching in their proxy voting and their support for these resolutions, going backwards, really for no other reason, as we see it, than fear of the political attacks. We see companies, even though they're moving forward, hiding their progress. And in the past, companies would be proud of DEI initiatives and announce them, and it helped to set standards for other players in their sectors. And now they're going underground with these initiatives, and it's a real problem for us. So we're engaged with a lot of allies. We have a coalition nationally where we're trying to push back on this political pressure, but we see that as a really, really important part of our work. And so I guess maybe I'll stop there, just because I've been talking a lot, and I'm happy to take the conversation in any direction, but maybe I'll put it out there either to see if people have questions, or Laura, if there are areas that you want me to touch on, let me know.
Great, thank you, Josh. I think my question is, what are some of the successes you've had? And I know these things, as you said, take a long time, but any hope, places where it's working?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Sure. I mean, we've made a lot of progress, I would say. Wherever there's progress, there's a long way to go. But I would say in the climate space, a lot of progress on the climate lobbying front. It's obviously easier to get sectors that where it's not the core business model, like the tech sector, to come out with positive frames on climate lobbying. But we have made a lot of progress there, of course, with the oil and gas sector. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And the oil and gas sector has dragged, the trade associations into some really regressive policy initiatives, especially the U.S. Chamber and the National Association of Manufacturers. But that's an area where we've seen a lot of progress, although a long way to go. And also in the climate area on methane, we've seen a lot of progress there, even in the oil and gas sector and the pipeline sector, and because it helps those sectors. We have a lot of concern about gas as a bridge form of energy, because we're trying to get companies to move away from fossil fuels, but it's in the interest of those sectors to tout gas as clean energy. So they're more on board than one would think in really addressing in a meaningful way methane leakage, which is a huge problem, and which they hadn't addressed until they got a lot of pressure. And so we've been able to have some wins there. We were very involved, a couple of years ago in really pushing the banking sector on financing of the private prison sector because of serious human rights concerns there, and have had a lot of success in getting them to end those business relationships. A couple caveats on that. One is that when we're successful, it's always because we're working closely with allies that are putting external pressure on, so that when we're on the inside, it gives us momentum, and it gives us a rationale for citing reputational risk as a problem. So that was one of the reasons why we were successful in that area. And also, for the banks, financing of private prisons is not, core business for them. So it's a little easier for them to sever those business relationships. We engage with the banks on their financing of oil and gas and their, the more generally their own compliance with Paris, and that's a much more complicated conversation. We've had some success in getting companies to put forth pretty robust human rights due diligence processes, and really try and, moving governance of human rights risks into sort of a much more proactive space. Again, always challenges there, because, it's one thing to have those governance measures in place. It's another question how they address them. And we're doing a lot of engagement now, in particular with the tech sector on that. And given the massive human rights risks that emanate from some of the business models of big tech, and that's a big challenge there. And likewise on worker rights, we've had some success actually working closely with allies around freedom of association, but big challenges remain, and success in moving companies forward on paid leave policies. But again, still big barriers there. And so, I would say on lobbying and political spending more generally, we've had a lot of success through the years in moving companies along in terms of disclosure on their lobbying and their political spending. But it's a lot more challenging, really, pushing them to align that political engagement with their core values. So that's where we are now, really, in pushing them. And the big challenge, despite big strides in transparency there, is they do a lot of their lobbying hiding behind trade associations, and getting them to be more accountable in that area is a big challenge. So those are a few areas where we've had a lot of success, but that always comes with more and more challenge as well.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing on the advocacy, just having done that for so many years, and having not to do as much maybe defense is always good. You've got some allies on your sides. I have a question from Steve, which is, what steps do we need to take to respond to the extraordinary attacks of the right wing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Look, the attacks on shareholder rights and on responsible investing, and I'm not saying anything you guys don't know, but just to put it in context, this is really part of a much broader attack on corporate accountability mechanisms. And so, this includes packing the courts with right-wing judges, right up to the Supreme Court, but all the way down. And now using those courts to come after rules and regulations, environmental rules, health rules, labor rules, and that's going to get worse, especially with pending Supreme Court decisions that are coming up that are going to weaken the ability of federal agencies to write rules and open them up to attack. So there's a big attack on the on regulatory safeguards, and it's part of a broader attack on really any and all ability to hold companies accountable and to put sensible guardrails on corporate conduct. So we see this attack on shareholder rights, on the ability of shareholders to really engage with companies as part and parcel of that. And really, we like to say that the reason the right is so focused on it is because of the success that we've had through the years. But the fact is that they're really, part of this broad, well-financed strategy is to cut off not just involuntary, or I should say not just mandatory rules, but also avenues to push companies to do voluntary measures to improve their sustainability. So that's the context of all of this. And we all need to push back. We always we invite investors to join our work, to join our movement. That we have a broad national coalition that's focused on the anti-ESG stuff, but again, we see it in the much broader context of these attacks on corporate accountability. But we're very engaged there and welcome folks to join. we have working groups on policy, on litigation, on messaging and comms there. And there's a lot of opportunities there for action. I would say it's organizations are part of that coalition. And so we welcome organizations to join, including foundations. As far as individuals, we try and help individuals also to find avenues for action. So if you're interested in being involved as an individual as opposed to an organization, a foundation, or the like, you can reach out to me directly and can help to plug you in there. And we're working closely with groups that are working on the big picture attacks on corporate accountability, like Public Citizen and Americans for Financial Reform and Center for American Progress and others. So we're all coordinated on that. So we really, and then of course, the other thing that's important, as I pointed out earlier, is to not let these attacks, freeze us in place. We see the chilling effect that it's having on big investors and on companies, but we certainly are not deterred. So it's really, really important to help support the ongoing work, whether that's as being involved in the in the corporate engagement process, or supporting organizations that are. We have in our membership a number of foundations that are using their endowments to engage with companies, and so if you're part of a foundation and in a position to do that, definitely encourage you to consider that. And if you're interested in what that journey looks like, I'm very happy to talk to you about that. There's opportunities to join coalitions like ICCR, where a lot of work is already being done, and you can kind of plug into that. So those are some ways to definitely get involved, but important to think about both the defense and the offense here.
Thank you. Other questions for Josh? And you're welcome to come off mute and ask yourself. You're back on mute, Denami.
Hi, yeah, sorry, my partner's like walking around. I'm like,
yeah, no worries.
Thanks so
Life
much for
Zoom.
everything you've shared.
Absolutely.
It's definitely a learning curve. I'm not super used to being in like the investor conversations, but they make sense to me. And I'm wondering, first, like, thank you. I know it's hard to be in those spaces and feel like you're working for a bigger vision for humanity, and people aren't really jumping up and volunteering to be accountable. So yeah, I don't know. A lot of my work is in environmental justice and food justice. And so I'm often, I'm like boycotting large corporations and don't eat at McDonald's, and with all of the investment in arms, right? And we've seen it, especially now on social media with a lot of the violent conflicts globally. Just wondering, like, what is the climate or what is the culture when you're in these spaces? Like, where is their fear? Do you see it? Do you see like where their fear comes up in like resisting? It feels like basics. Like, how can you look at another human and not want to give them rights or parental leave or things that to me seem so easy, right? Is it their wealth? Is it the resources? Like, what exactly is stopping them? And like, what about the political, like the political atmosphere? Is it that they're going to get in trouble and they don't want to like pay fines, or like, I'm like, what is the piece that is holding them back from being able to meet us? I mean, I know the right folks have a different reality that they're kind of looking at sometimes. So with that asterisk or nuance, but yeah, wondering like culturally, if you observe or see any of those things that we can like work on together as humans. I don't know.
Yeah, no, good questions. And yeah, I would say the right certainly has a different point of view. In fact, really the only political faction on the globe that denies climate science, and so it does make the work challenging because you're not operating in a rational environment. I think that as far as the fear factor goes, I would say members of our coalition, investors that have been working on these issues for in many cases decades, don't have that same level. I mean, I think we're all wary of the political situation, but not afraid to be out front on these issues. And I think, in some ways, this is, really driving action by our members, even as some of them are getting dragged before Congress and, grilled for antitrust violations. It's just strengthening our resolve. So, an example is, what I mentioned to you guys earlier is that 2 of our members, filed that vote no solicitation on 2 Exxon directors. There's going to be a lot of blowback on them, but they're taking the lead there and actually getting a lot of support. So I think within our coalition, we're all resolved to push on. But where the fear is creeping in and where it's becoming a problem is that we're only successful when we're able to move others forward, right? So like one big problem is the big asset managers. Like most people's money are with giant mutual funds like retirement money is, BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street. And so consequently, these big asset managers hold a lot of power with companies. Sometimes they own, more than 10% of a company. And so the way that they come down on these issues, they have a lot of influence. And we've spent a lot of time through the years trying to bring them along on these issues because, these shareholder resolutions come to a vote, and we don't often win, but that's not the point, isn't winning, because these resolutions are they're precatory. They're advice to companies. At the end of the day, companies don't have to follow them, but when there's a big vote, it sends a strong message to a company. And even getting a third of investors to support a resolution sends a strong signal to the company that they really need to come to the table with their investors and work this out and move forward. And so, up until 2022, we had been gradually getting more and more and more support for these resolutions, primarily by bringing along these big asset managers to support them on climate, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, on corporate lobbying and political spending. Those are 3 areas where support had really gone up. And then, the right turned up the heat and started, making all of these threats. A bunch of red state attorney generals sent this letter to the big asset managers, saying they were going to investigate their proxy voting, and they're, threatening them with collusion and antitrust violations. And like that drumbeat of pressure, of threats of enforcement, all of it without legal basis. We've spoken with Department of Justice and the FTC and antitrust experts. There's no there, but just the threats create a chilling effect. And that support that had been climbing, to 2022, we got, something like 50 majority votes on our resolutions. Those were like record highs. And so we were really building support. And that was one of the reasons why the right came at this process so hard. And that support has completely melted away at these big asset managers, like off a cliff. And, when we talk and we engage with them all the time, that's part of what we do is we talk to them, we try to move them, and they have all sorts of excuses. Resolutions have gotten too prescriptive. There's too many, but it's all nonsense. It's all political pressure. And, they have legal and compliance people that are, that's how they operate. We don't want to, we can't get involved here. We have to keep our heads down, and it undermines their credibility, because what the right is saying is, the investor concern for climate risk isn't about fiduciary duty. This is about, coastal elites pushing their elite, social values on hard-earned, on hardworking pensioners. That's the kind of stuff that they say. And any serious investor knows that that's nonsense, knows that if you're not grappling with climate risk, you're not looking at the long-term risks in your investments. And actually, it's a violation of fiduciary duty to refuse to consider those factors if you owe pension obligations to people over the long term. But that's the kind of rhetoric that comes in, what we say to the BlackRocks of the world is, if you then, in response to that rhetoric, stop supporting these resolutions, you basically prove them right, because what you're saying is we're not supporting them based on fiduciary duty. So it's really problematic. And so that fear factor is out there. Likewise with companies, you'd think companies, they have so much power. Why would they be afraid? But, they see what happened to Target and, Bud Light and those, high profile events, and they're all afraid of being targeted. And so they're going on, they're not necessarily going backwards in their understanding of these issues, because people inside a lot of these companies, some companies are completely unenlightened, like Exxon. But other companies, they understand. They're not stupid. They run businesses. They understand the importance of these issues. But now they're afraid to say anything, and that chilling effect can be really devastating. So there's definitely a big fear factor there. So I like, to your question about like where's it coming from, I think it's it's a misguided sense that they're going to get targeted and take a financial hit if they take a stand. And our view, of course, is that, look, this is a long-term thing. If you have principles, you stick to them, and then people see you as having integrity instead of waffling all over the place. And it's not good for your brand legacy to be waffling all over the place. And it's not good if you're a big institutional investor to say climate is a matter of fiduciary duty, and then to run and hide when in terms of your proxy voting. So it's a big problem. Part of our efforts are really to build a much broader consensus and understanding amongst investors that that these big, and including amongst asset owners that are clients of these big asset managers, that they want to see continued progress on climate and these other issues. But the fear factor is a real problem. And honestly, that's the primary rationale for this push on the right, is to create that fear, to muddy the waters, to throw sand in the gears. And to this point they've been successful, but this is a long-term effort. Of course, depending on the election in the fall, it could become a lot more dire. But if that election goes badly, then maybe shareholder resolutions are the least of our problems.
Yeah, probably. Thanks for
yeah. not to be all gloom and doom. I mean, look,
it's super helpful. It's super helpful what you shared. And like we do a lot of education-based programming, and I'm like, when you say things like, it's the asset managers, I think about like how much they know, how much risk they have, the just transitions, right? Like they're afraid of losing what their livelihood is, which I would understand too, right? Like my livelihood isn't a constant threat because I'm on the other end of the wealth spectrum. But like I can empathize where they're coming from, even if it's, misguided or misplaced, and like trying to understand where the people power is and how to shift the culture of fear, which is really insidious, right? Like the entire United States is based on fear. That's the whole birth of this country, right? And so it's a deeper cultural movement that is being actively resisted and sabotaged. And like, anyway, I think it's important to be really transparent the way that you are, so that we can all be really clear about some of our options and how to like resist the fear and so like love and hope and growth instead of just like fear and dissonance and
there's a lot of that fear and dissonance. But I mean, I guess the flip side of that is there's a very strong coalition of folks and interconnected groups that are really working on this. There's really strong pushback. We have a lot of long-term strategies. So there is there's pushback. And last thing I would say is like this is all interconnected. There's an attack on DEI. Companies are in fact being threatened with litigation for their DEI initiatives. And we see the links here. So we're all working together with the groups that are working on those issues as well, including looking at litigation options, both defensively and affirmatively, given these laws that are popping up in the red states. So there's very robust pushback. Definitely would love for you all to join. There's different ways to join. Feel free to reach out to me individually if you have questions or want to talk about ways that you can be involved. Very happy to have those conversations.
Great, thank you. I've shared in the chat just the website for ICCR, and after this call, we'll share your contact information.
Yeah,
And
definitely. Yeah, if you please share my email, and definitely encourage folks to reach out. Sorry,
right.
Laura.
No, go ahead. And as you know, I know we've got 10 minutes left, so I want to say for the next 5 minutes, I would just like to hear from you what what are kind of some of the first steps that folks can take? I think we've got a range of people who might have, casual, like I've got, retirement account, others who might be invested through other foundations. And then I also hear on the other side of it, like kind of the divestment world of like, okay, I don't have any investments that are touching any of these companies. So where do I have leverage? So maybe just a few thoughts on what the
Well,
first step
yeah,
might be.
maybe working backwards, in terms of divestment. I mean, a lot of our members are divested from certain industries, whether it be fossil fuels or weapons, gun manufacturers and the like, tobacco. But there is, if you're holding public equities, then it's important to be engaging on them, regardless of sector. There's very few companies in the public space that where there aren't issues to work on. If you want to engage on climate, then there's opportunities to engage with all sectors on their climate lobbying, on their trade association membership, even if their carbon footprint is not a big issue. Although I would say in the tech space, as I'm sure you all have been reading, increasingly a direct problem given the energy footprint there. But there's, so the point is there's not just, it's not just about the worst or the most problematic sectors, but there's important engagement to be done across all sectors. So our members engage endless number of sectors on on so many different topics. And so I wouldn't worry about if you're divested from fossil fuels, what can we do on climate, because there's a bunch of other stuff that can be done, engaging other sectors on that topic. And then as far as getting involved, I spend a lot of time talking to foundations. Frankly, we feel like there are not enough foundation endowments in this space and active, given the alignment between mission and this the need to align investments with mission. There's a number of foundations in our membership, but there's a lot of room for growth there. So, if you're part of a foundation, there really is an opportunity to get involved through your endowment. I would definitely encourage you to do that, and happy to talk to you about what that would look like. As an individual, it kind of depends. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. There are, if you want to file resolutions, we can connect you with organizations that can do that on your behalf. If you're inclined to support or to give philanthropically, there's a lot of need. ICCR, we're a low budget organization. We're a coalition of investors, but we're a 501c3, and we're hand to mouth on our budget, but also we have a lot of allies that are also doing fantastic work, and also need support. So that's another way to support philanthropically. So but there's a lot of different ways to get involved, and happy to answer any questions now or again going forward as you're thinking this through. But if you do have investments, there really are ways to kind of plug into existing efforts and be very active in that space, and I would encourage you to consider it. The last thing I would say is for example, like at ICCR, our members, are not just doing engagement, but we also send around, there's opportunities to be part of dialogue. We do investor letters where investors come together to push, Nike on their supply chains, or, the SEC on their climate disclosure rule. There's a lot of, whether it's on policy or whether on particular, concerns about companies, a lot of opportunities to kind of weigh in there if you're an investor. So being part of these coalitions is is important. And one thing I will say, in all of these attacks, one thing I failed to mention, I know this is a group interested in climate justice, is, this SEC rule on climate disclosure, which we were all very involved with. I think it's just a sign of like the hysteria on the right around climate. It's a simple disclosure rule. It was watered down substantially, and there's still about 8 separate lawsuits on that. And a number of us are filing amicus briefs in support of the SEC, but there may be also opportunities to support there as well.
Thank you. That's a great range of options. So I just want to thank Josh for joining us today and sharing his expertise and the range of issues that he and his organization and others are fighting for is really important, because as we've all said, it's all connected. And that there's so many places where we can get involved, and different opportunities for involvement. So thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Clapping.
It's great speaking with all of you. Really appreciate it. I'm happy to come back for further conversations. And, as I said, Laura, please share my contact. And if any of you want to discuss further, just reach out to me, and happy to do so.
Great, absolutely. So this is the last of our quarterly Reframing Philanthropy, and we are definitely taking suggestions of topics for future. So feel free, when we email everybody after this event, you can respond, you can throw it in the chat here. And we really appreciate everybody being part of these conversations. We didn't want to do just like a webinar where you just learn from somebody. I think it's really important for us to grapple with these ideas and talk with each other. So I hope that they've been helpful to you all. We appreciate your being here. We appreciate your support of Peace Development Fund, and keep fighting the fight. That's why we're all here. One little push at a time. And somebody told me years ago, like progress is like the threads of a screw. Sometimes you have to go backwards before you go forwards again. And I feel like we're in the backwards place right now, or for the people who watch the show with the underside. But I do believe that we're going to start we're starting to go forward again, and we're not noticing it, but it's there. So have a great day. Thank you, Josh. And we'll see you all in the fall.
Thanks, everyone. Be well and take care.
Thank you.